Video games and the industry around them are undergoing a major transformation. They are coming into conflict with one of the very fundamental forces of our world: time. Yeah, this is a major departure from the kind of stuff I normally create. Despite that, I feel this is important to discuss as I spend a lot of my time playing and talking about games. Before we go any further, I'm gonna preface a couple things. First and foremost, this is not a video games are garbage because of the woke mind virus essay. Last I checked, I wasn't a terminally online bigot. On the flip side, it's not going to be a corporations are shitifying everything piece either. I mean, they kinda have, but I have nothing new to add to that space. No, the thing I want to talk about is the question everyone inevitably asks themselves: is this game worth my time? Time really is the great equalizer. Everyone experiences it at roughly the same pace, no one can avoid its effects, and every second is worth just that: 1 second. The idea that any one person's time can be worth more than another's is the result of social constructs and self-delusions, not the laws of reality. Time only starts to get weird when you move at theoretical speeds. Anyway, from an existential viewpoint, our time is limited. There are only so many hours in a day, week, month, year, and in the totality of our lives. Only so much time to see and do all the things we want to do. And due to the nature of our societies, there are limited amounts of leisure time outside of working hours. Naturally, we want the things we do with these precious hours to be at least worth the time spent engaging. Now, combine this sentiment with a world where you are spoiled for choice. Especially on PC. There are hundreds of new games released on Steam every week. In fact, to date of writing, October 29th, 2024, there have been 15,257 games released on Steam in 2024 alone. That is too many games. Looking at these Steam DB charts, you can clearly see that since 2014, the staggering number of games to release on Steam, a number that has consistently grown year over year. In fact, more games released on Steam from 2014 to 2024 than the entirety of the Atari, Nintendo, PlayStation, Sega, and Xbox catalogs. I even threw in every arcade game ever made, and I'm still short by like 10,000 games. Also, take note that I got these stats from Moby Games, and they are likely inflated as many games release on multiple platforms. So even with highball numbers, Steam blows it out of the water. Now, this is all due in part to various changes Steam made to their submitting process. See Steam Greenlight and Steam Direct. But my point here is that there are more games being released on one digital storefront in a single year than could ever be conceivably played during the course of the average human lifespan. By the way, this is not to say that everyone plays the same types of games. Trust me, I enjoy myself a niche genre. But I am playing demos for new RTS games. To me, that is indicative that the nichest of genres are getting inundated with new titles. I am terrified to look at the roguelike section on Steam because I don't think I would ever reach the end of that list. Combine this acceleration in releases with the games themselves getting progressively longer, filled with more things to do. I only need to point to the difference in time it takes to complete Assassin's Creed games. The first game takes about an average of 15 hours to complete the main story. A hefty game in its own right, but it is dwarfed in comparison to Valhalla, a game that will take the average player 61 hours to beat. That's of course by design, but for a multitude of reasons. Increasing the nebulous hours to dollars spent ratio for one, justifying large budgets and team sizes for another, but the unspoken reason is the more time spent with my product means the less time that person is using a competitor's, which results in most AAA games being open world experiences. Worlds that are full of content, but that content is often the same handful of side missions or collectibles. Things that through repetition become boring to engage with over time. What's worse to me is that these worlds are usually lifeless outside of occasional scripted events or enemy patrols. Ghost of Tsushima is one of the best open worlds to date. It encompasses the entirety of a real-life island near to scale. And yet, its otherworldly beauty couldn't prevent me from getting bored with the side content about halfway through. I can only capture so many Mongol camps without it feeling like a chore. Although, this trend may be reversing itself somewhat. I cherry-picked Assassin's Creed Valhalla earlier to use as an example because its sequel, Mirage, is significantly shorter. Perhaps Ubisoft has finally realized many players don't enjoy doing repetitive tasks. At least alone. So far, I've only been talking about video games where you spend money up front. We cannot have this discussion without talking about the free-to-play market. It has never been easier to play video games. All you need is an electronic device and an internet connection to access the largest video games of them all. As a result of being free multiplayer products, many of these games have massive populations while drawing in insane revenues from item and cosmetic sales. For perspective, League of Legends generated 1.8 billion USD of revenue in 2022. Hence, why every game publisher on Earth has been trying to get into this space for the last decade. Most of which have failed because these companies are learning the hard way that people tend to latch onto one or two of these games at a time. Maybe total. They don't have time for more. Most of their spare time is devoted to these, frankly, predatory games. Now look, this is a contentious topic because people want to believe that the thing they like isn't out to screw them. But they are. I mean, the money you are spending is on non-transferable digital goods. What do you think is going to happen to your League skins when the game shuts down? Not if, when. Because nothing lasts forever. And what's sad is that people will continue to play until the day League dies because it has latched its hooks deep into people. I'm not going any further than that into the psychology of how these games make people addicted. That's for another video and a smarter person than I. Instead, I will point out that since these players are hooked into their forever game, it has become increasingly difficult to get them to play anything else. Case in point, my roommate. Most of what he plays is Hearthstone, League of Legends, Bethesda RPGs, and the latest Dragon Ball game. That kind of player right there is a huge subsection of the market. People who will only leave their forever game if something directly piques their interest. Otherwise, it probably isn't worth the time to them. Not when they could have gotten their free daily dopamine hits instead. I mean shit, I'm not immune from this either. I have played League of Legends, World of Tanks, War Thunder, and RuneScape for significant periods of time over the last decade. War Thunder still kinda has its hooks in me, seeing as I go back for a month or two every year. Hell, I've sunk a significant amount of time and money into the chasm that is EVE Online. I very much understand what it's like to be the kind of person I'm describing. Another time-related issue I want to delve into a bit is in regards to development times. When I was a young boy, games would receive sequels within 2 to 3 years. Often sooner. You were able to establish entire franchises in the time it took to go from middle school to college in the US. Now you are lucky if a game comes out during that time frame. For example, the time between the release of God of War 2018 and Ragnarok was 4.5 years. In that same amount of time, God of War 1, 2, and Chains of Olympus released. 3 was set to come out within 6 months. Or how about Red Dead? The time between Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2 is almost 8.5 years. The entirety of the Jak and Daxter series came out over the same amount of time. That's 6 games made in the same amount of time to make a single sequel. And yeah, GTA 5 happened, but that's separate teams at the same publisher. Another great recent example is Concord. 8 years and hundreds of millions later, the product couldn't survive 2 weeks on shelves. Meanwhile, the Yakuza series had Kiwami 1 and 2, 6, 7, and 8 as mainline entries, all while the studio made an additional 5 spin-off games. It seems like a lot of developers are constantly making new assets rather than reusing or potentially updating old ones. Ultimately, wasted work. Which leads me to an entirely different business problem related to time as well. However long a game takes to make, it has to beat the average market return during that time period to have been worth the investment in the first place. That's just the cold, math-driven logic of investing. And the longer games take to make, the greater likelihood they will not be able to beat those market returns. Concord is yet again a fantastic example. For the game to have been profitable, it would have had to have beaten a 103.49% return when compared to the S&P 500 during the time period of September 2016 to September 2024. On screen now is the basic math I did to get to this number. And this is just based on the initial investment of 200 million USD. Never mind all of the money sunk in afterward. Concord would have had to become one of the best-selling games of all time to have been viable in any way. And that didn't happen. Ultimately, Firewalk Studios has closed its doors. Concord will live on as a case study of how not to develop a AAA game. Time will pass, and both will eventually be forgotten for another greater failure. So yeah, from my stupid layman perspective, the greatest limiting factor video games are now running up against is time itself. And I don't think that's a limitation that can be easily overcome without figuring out how to have 8 days a week. Frankly, I have a feeling that the video game industry as a whole is going to either crash or go through a severe recession. AAA especially seems at risk. However, I think video games will survive it, like they did the crash of the 80s. What will video games become afterwards? I don't know. I hope they come out the other side as smaller, tighter products rather than the current trend of empty virtual worlds to explore, ones that are clearly unsustainable to make. Maybe someone will come along with a seal of approval to inspire confidence again. Maybe you know better than me, or you have your own ideas on the subject, which by all means, please share them with me in the comments. I am very curious to know where other people stand on this matter. The one thing I can be sure of is that time will always be a factor. Thanks for watching. More garbage to come.